dorks.
Hello and welcome to the CommanDorks. I'm Beef.
I'm Taryn, and we are back again with two new Commander decks, which are a bit of a David and Goliath matchup this time around.
That's right, in this video I'll be discussing my Azorious Voltron deck, Glenn Moonwalker, with Glenn Voice of Calm as commander. But before I dive in, be sure to also check out Taryn's Dinosaur Kindred deck, Dino DNA, by following the link in the description.
All right, Beef, tell us how your David deck is going to take down the Dinosaur Goliath deck.
All right, so excited to talk about it. This is a deck I've enjoyed for a while. Built around, can't even see it, didn't glare, Glenn from The Walking Dead. Glenn Voice of Calm is a 1/3 human advisor with Skulk, which means he can't be blocked by creatures with greater power. And whenever Glenn deals combat damage to a player, you draw cards equal to his power. So, what's the pitch? This is the third installment in my endeavor to build at least 4 of the original Universes Beyond Walking Dead cards as commanders. Following previous showcases of Rick and Negan, we now have Glenn. Fans of the show know that Fate and the showrunners were not particularly kind to fan favorite Glenn, who left the show. We'll say left the show and took a large section of the consistent viewership with him.
He let it all go to his head.
Yeah, fame will do that too. No, we don't blame Glenn, the character, or the actor in any way. That he let's just say he was written out. In the way that characters get written out in The Walking Dead. But needless to say, I wanted to take Glenn and avoid his catastrophic ending and suggest an alternative timeline in which Glenn was instead taken in and healed by gentle and generous moonfolk. And as he healed, he learned their ways, allowing him to moonwalk past any future danger. A little cheesy? Yeah, that's okay. That's kind of the vibe here. So Glenn, he's our man. If he can't do it, no one can. Glenn is our primary wincon. He's our primary draw engine. So what's the name of the game? The name of the game is making sure that Glenn can get in for as much damage as possible, and we got to keep him alive at all costs. So, that being said, things don't always go to plan, as Glenn can attest. So we've stocked a few alternative win conditions for backup options to close things out as well. So I'll go over a few key pieces here. These key pieces that I'm mentioning are really part of our Voltron strategy. So these are our pieces for pumping Glenn up and for making sure that Glenn can always get in for his damage, considering that commander damage is our win condition for the most part. And card draw is really the name of the game with Glenn. So we need these pieces to make this all work. Those pieces that we're including: Noble Heritage, which is a background piece. It says that when your commander enters the battlefield or at the beginning of your upkeep, each player may put 2+1/+1 counters on a creature they control, and if they do, I gain protection from that player until the next turn. We're running Duelist's Heritage, which is an enchantment that says at the beginning, or whenever creatures attack, you can give a creature double strike. So I can do that on my turn, every turn, and give Glenn double strike, which is great. But I can also use it politically to throw a wrench in the works, or incentivize someone not to attack me. I'm also running Silverblade Paladin for the same double striking reason. He's a soul bond creature that gives double strike. We're running a few pieces that give some unblockable. I'll go through those here. We've got Aqueous Form is an aura that just gives him unblockable. We're running Steel of the Godhead, which is an unblockable enchantment aura that also pumps him because he's he's blue and white. We're also running Aether Tunnel, which is another unblockable aura that pumps him by a +1 power. And then a few pieces of equipment. We're running Civic Saber, which effectively for 2 mana, it's giving him +2/+0. 1 to cast, 1 to equip, and it gives him +1/+0 for each color in his color identity. So pretty low curve and good payoff on that as well. And Imperial Plate is another big one. That's a great equipment that says the creature gets additional power and toughness equal to the number of cards in your hand.
Oh god.
Talk
about compounding upon yourself.
Yeah. It absolutely compounds, and yes, it's a good time for me, not for my opponents. And then one other piece that I'm going to mention here that's also relevant, but synergizes with a larger land strategy that I'll get into a little bit later. But I'm also running a land called Contested War Zone. It's a land that's been sitting in my binder for a very long time, and finally found the perfect home for it in Glen. It's a land that has a pump ability to give a creature +1/+0, but it's got a downside because it can get stolen when an opponent attacks you. But as I said, I've got some synergies that me having a low land count can really work to my favor in this deck as well. So piloting is really simple with Glen. We want to play Glen. We want to suit him up with some stuff to make him a little bit stronger, and then we're going to swing for the fences. And the rest of the deck is really devoted to keeping him alive and keeping him on the board long enough to take our opponents down with Glen, or giving us enough time to draw enough cards to assemble an alternative win condition. So, early game, let's talk a little bit of ramp. Ramp pieces I'm running, of course, we're running Soul Ring, we're running Arcane Signet, Talisman of Progress, Thought Vessel is just great for if Glen does get removed and I've got a big hand, I don't want to be discarding. So I've got a number of pieces in the deck that are also giving me no max hand size. I think I'm running a land, I'm running the Thought Vessel, and I'm also running a creature that gives the effect as well. Surveyor's Scope. Surveyor's Scope, I should also mention, is a pretty good effect. It's great for that catch-up ramp that I'm talking about, in that it's an artifact for 2 that taps and exiles itself to search your library for up to X basic land cards, where X is the number of players who control at least 2 more lands than you. Put those cards in the battlefield, then shuffle your library. So if I set myself back a little bit via, say, a bounce land or 2, or a land that gets stolen by an opponent, or a land that I sacrifice myself, I can set myself up for an opportunity to get some good ramp out of the Surveyor's Scope. Another piece that I really like that also synergizes with the Voltron aspect is Sword of the Animist. It's an equipment that gives it a +1/+1, and when you attack, you search your library for a basic land card and put it on the battlefield tapped. So, great piece. Another one of my favorite equipment ramp pieces is Dowsing Dagger, which is also another great piece for this deck for the same reasons. It flips into a land that taps for 3 mana when you deal damage with it equipped. And I've got some other ways that kind of take advantage of untapping some of my particularly extra effective lands as well. Weathered Wayfarer is not truly ramp, but it's getting specific lands out of my library when I'm behind on lands. So effectively, it's letting me hit my land drops with the right lands at the right time. Walking Atlas is a great piece. It's an artifact construct creature for 2 that taps to allow you to put a land from your hand into play. So I've got some opportunities, and when Glen is your commander, you have a pretty big hand, pretty frequently. So being able to get those lands down is great, and can really push you towards the end game all the much faster. And then one last piece that I'm including in the ramp, but it's also kind of a thematic piece. I'm running Fate Stitcher. Is a 4-drop zombie that has an ability where you can tap him to tap or untap another target permanent. So that's a pretty fun piece. And the real benefit, of course, is that obviously I can tap down my opponent's creatures, but even more valuable is the option to untap my bounce lands, or untap my Lotus Field, or untap my Dowsing Dagger land, and just ramp myself with it, or untap my Walking Atlas and get another land on the battlefield. So just kind of a fun thematic piece that also works pretty well with some of the land choices that I made. Card draw. So as I mentioned, Glenn does most of the heavy lifting in the card draw department, but I did have a few others in here that kind of help along the way. Wizard class is one that I'll mention right off the bat. It's an enchantment class, and all three of the levels in this one are great. The first one says you have no max hand size. The second level says draw 2 cards. And the third one says whenever you draw a card, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control.
Ooh, so, that's perfect for Glenn.
All of them are really so good for Glenn. Yeah. They all do exactly what I need at the right times, too. Let's see. I'm running a Frantic Search. Is a card draw piece, and it synergizes nicely with those lands, those lands that tap for more than one, especially. A new piece from Fallout that I'm enjoying in here is Nerd Rage. It's an aura enchantment that when it ETBs, you draw 2. It says you have no max hand size, and it says when you attack, if you have 10 or more cards in hand, the creature gets +10/+10 until end of turn.
What
Pretty
the
great
hell?
Synergy.
What?
And Glenn is not afraid of being called a nerd. So yes, that's a great piece in here. I included Trade Routes. Is an enchantment that has some synergy for me having a low land count, in that it's got an ability where I can bounce lands with it to my hand, and then I can also discard those lands to draw more cards. Open the Armory is a tutor, which oftentimes I consider tutors just to be card draw. They're just very specific card draw. And they're putting a card that you need into your hand. So it's going to let me get any of my auras or any of my equipments. Pretty great for Glenn. And then I'm also running 2 lands that, again, they sack themselves. So it's all about this continuing to pile on this synergy of keeping my land counts low. A couple different lands, Gates of Istfell and Memorial to Genius, are both lands that have a sack ability to draw 2 cards. You pay 5 mana, effectively it's 5 mana, and then you can draw 2 cards. And but yeah, card draw. Like I said, Glenn's going to do most of that for us, but there's just a few pieces to kind of grease the wheels. Removal. So removal pieces here. One of the first and one of my favorites is a spell that I know Taryn's familiar with. It's called Fumble. And it's great, really great, when you're up against other Voltron decks. When you see that opportunity to bounce the creature that's all heavily equipped and then steal all the equipments and auras and put them on Glenn, I guess. But it's also good in a pinch too, because if somebody's targeting Glenn with a spell, I can always bounce the Glenn and then put them all onto another creature. At least I'm gonna keep some of that value.
That's true. Yeah.
But that's it's a little simpler. You know, bounce isn't true removal, but when you
tempo removal. You know,
exactly.
Yeah.
And when you add on the ability that it has just steal, a whole bunch of permanents in the right situation. I mean, you can really hammer somebody with that.
Oh yeah, it's got a very high ceiling for sure.
And it's not nothing to just suddenly lose them. You know, it'd be one thing if you just gained, like, they equipped themselves to Glenn, and then they could turn around and do the equip cost again to re-equip it to theirs. But no, you gain control of those equipments. So they're yours for the rest of the game unless they've got something else that's going to return all permanents to their original owners, or if they can bounce them themselves or destroy them and then reanimate, or whatever the case might be. So that's a good one. A couple other pieces of targeted removal. We've got a Generous Gift and a Path to Exile. I'm also running a Cyclonic Rift because I don't play that many blue decks, and I've got a couple of copies of Cyclonic Rift. So I mean, you need a board wipe. You need a board wipe. I'm gonna need a roast thing. You know, it's about keeping Glenn alive at all costs. So we're also running Ondu Inversion, which is a great big board wipe on the back of a land. most of the time I'm probably not going to be casting that as a board wipe. But considering I'm running 3 bounce lands in the deck, it's really easy for me to run these MDFC lands and know that I'm going to have a chance to get that back.
It's almost like you're doing a hideaway for a spell underneath.
Yeah, I mean, that's really what it is. It's just like, I'll get this out of my hand for now, and if I need it later, at least I know where it is.
Yep.
I'm also running Winds of Abandon, which is a great board wipe piece that I mentioned. I think is actually in Bird Flu as well. I'm running it in 2 different decks. Great for exiling all of my opponent's creatures if I overload it, and then they all get lands, and for all of those things. But it's really great to do that right before I cast a Balancing Act. So Balancing Act is one of 2 pieces that are kind of core to my low land count synergy strat in this deck. Balancing Act is a sorcery. Each player chooses a number of permanents he or she controls equal to the number of permanents controlled by the player who controls the fewest, and sacrifices the rest. Each player discards cards from his or her hand the same way. So, the whole plan with this one is simply to only use it when I find myself in a scenario where my land count is very low. Maybe I've managed to phase Glenn out after he's attacked, so now I've got no creatures on the board and only a couple lands. And now all of a sudden a Balancing Act can make my opponent sacrifice 75% of their board states. And it can be truly backbreaking, especially considering that it's permanents. It's not non-land permanents. So this is even going to get those landfall decks that are racing ahead. It's just always nice knowing that somewhere in my pile, somewhere in my deck,
you got a way to even the playing field again. Yeah.
Got a way to even the playing field. Balancing Act is one of 2 pieces. I'll mention it again probably later, very briefly. But the other piece that does a similar thing is Restore Balance, which is a suspend card. It's effectively the fixed version of OG Balance, which is banned in Commander. Which, if it wasn't banned in Commander, I think I'd be running it on this deck.
Of course.
But it's a suspend spell, so for 1 white you can suspend it 10 to 6, so it takes 6 turns. If I'm being honest, again, very rarely am I actually going to suspend it in this one, and I'll explain why. But this one says, each player chooses a number of lands they control equal to the number of lands controlled by the player who controls the fewest, then sacrifices the rest. Players sacrifice creatures and discard cards the same way. So, very, very similar to what Balancing Act is achieving. It's just on that suspend. But a couple other pieces that are also removal, but that I typically find myself using them more as protection pieces, and those are March of Swirling Mists and Slip Out the Back. Slip Out the Back, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature, it phases out. And then for March of Swirling Mists, that one's got the option of, as an additional cost to cast the spell, it's blue and X. You may exile a number of blue cards from your hand. The spell costs 2 colorless less for each card exiled this way. And it says up to X target creatures phase out.
So you exile 1 blue card, you phase out 2 of your own things, and yeah. Yep.
Potentially. Well, the really beautiful thing is that it's not just your things.
Right.
So I could use it as a fog if I want to. If I'm about to, somebody's swinging all out at me, and I just phase all their creatures out, now they aren't hitting me, and I can swing through unheeded, unhindered on my next turn. So that's a great piece as well. Couple of pieces of recursion here, just a couple. One that seems to be in just about every single white deck I build. Savin's Reclamation, just a reliable and solid piece of recursion. That's going to be great for getting some of my equipment or some of my auras back if Glenn gets removed. And then the other piece that does kind of the same thing is the first Moonfolk that I'm going to be talking about here, and that's Tameshi, Reality Architect. Tameshi is a Moonfolk wizard for 2 and a blue. That says whenever one or more non-creature permanents are returned to hand, draw a card. This ability only triggers once each turn. So that's great for my land bouncing effects, getting me extra cards in hand as well. But it's got a second ability of X and a white. Return a land you control to its owner's hand. Return target artifact or enchantment card with mana value X or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Activate only as a sorcery. So again, just perfect for getting back these pieces that are key to keeping Glenn firing on all cylinders and getting in for big damage. Protection pieces, this is kind of a big one. This is really, like I said, the bulk of what we're trying to do is just keep Glenn alive. And so to do that, we're running Unwind, which is a counter non-creature spell, and untap 3 lands. So that kind of synergizes with some of the stuff I've talked about. An Offer You Can't Refuse. Counters, I believe, a non-creature spell. Yes, and its controller creates 2 treasure tokens. So again, non-creature spell especially, those are the kind of things, those are the direct targeted removal, that's board wipes. That's the kind of stuff I need to stop to save Glenn.
Yep.
And in the same vein, Dispel is also another low-cost counter spell, good for protecting from those sort of removal pieces. That counters an instant speed spell. I'm also running Force of Will, a proxy of Force of Will, because with Glenn, I have big hands, and I've got plenty of cards that I can't cast at any given time, so it's no big deal at all to discard a blue card so that I can get a free counter spell off. A few more pieces here. Running a Winged Boots. Winged Boots gives a ward 4 and flying, so additional evasion and more protection.
Might as well just say
well.
hexproof, because no one wants to pay for.
Well, you beat me to it, so I guess I'm also running Swiftfoot Boots, which gives you haste and hexproof. A couple more here. We've got Linvala, Shield of Seagate. Has a sacrifice ability to give creatures you control hexproof or indestructible till end of turn. And similarly, Selfless Spirit sacks itself to give creatures you control indestructible till end of turn. We're running Teferi's Veil. This is a cool enchantment that I have not really seen much, but it's really great in this deck because, like I said, we gotta protect Glenn. And Teferi's Veil says whenever a creature you control attacks, it phases out at end of combat. So I don't have to hold up protection mana now once he's attacked for turn, which is great. Obviously, I can still hold up counter magic, but I don't have to worry about holding it up just to keep Glenn alive. And so that'll happen every single turn. A couple more pieces. Sajiri's Shelter is another MDFC land with an instant speed, protection from target color till end of turn, instant spell on the other side, and then classic Teferi's Protection as well for keeping everything rolling here. Utility pieces. This is a pretty short addition here. My utility pieces I mentioned are Island Sanctuary. Island Sanctuary is an enchantment for 2, 1 and a white, that says you may skip your draw step. And if you do, then your opponent's creatures can't attack you unless they have flying or island walk. And
that's going to be a problem for me.
Yeah. And when Glenn is drawing 3, 4, 5, 6 cards, it's like it doesn't mean anything to skip your card draw at the beginning of your turn. So it's an easy trade to make in this deck as well. I'm running a Leyline of Anticipation. Just kind of it's beneficial because I'm running so many counter spells and so much instant speed interaction. I'm able to hold that up and then still dump my mana on a big goofy Moonfolk.
Yeah, if you have crazy sized hands, that's just good. Just really good to have out there. Yep.
And then it's kind of a win con. and it's kind of the biggest groan inducer that whenever I see someone else playing it, but I'm playing it anyway. So Omniscience, I'm running an Omniscience in this deck, and I run it simply because, again, I'm drawing so many cards that being able to play them without any issues is
Just dump your hand, man.
It's a great way of enabling the big turns and really closing things out once Glenn's put in his big work. So the restore balance, that's a fun little combo. It's not really a combo, but if I'm late game and I've got 30 cards in my hand and it happens to include an Omniscience and a restore balance,
gross.
Now I can just cast it without doing the suspend. I can just cast it immediately. So that's the idea with that. I have tried, just suspending it really early, just to see how it impacts the game, and usually it's just kind of an awkward thing to try and plan around. An event that's going to happen 6 turns in the future. You just
that everybody sees coming,
Exactly. So that's where being able to just drop it when Omniscience hits the board is pretty slick. Mana base. So I've kind of talked about it a little bit. The deck, it's running 3 bounce lands. It's running lands that can sacrifice themselves for card draw. Lands that get stolen by our opponents. And those might not sound like good news to most people. That's not what most people are looking for in their mana base. But like I said, with those balance effects, we can really hurt land ramp decks, and who doesn't want to hurt a land ramp deck? I mean, it's hard not to want to see them suffer just a little bit. As someone who has a land ramp deck or two,
Windgrace.
I know I deserve it. So, Lord Windgrace, yes, yeah. Exactly. So, I deserve it. Then you must deserve it too. So, we're gonna do something about that. I'm gonna go through a few multi-purpose cards here, and really, what I'm gonna talk about in the multi-purpose here section is the other Moonfolk that I haven't mentioned yet. Like I said, it's Glenn, Moonwalker. He's moonwalking past everybody. But we have only talked about one of our Moonfolks. So the other Moonfolk that I'm running Oboro Breezecaller, which has an ability of pay 2, bounce a land you control to untap target land. So you can kind of see where the synergies are there. The untapping of my lands that tap for 3 and whatnot, that can be pretty relevant. Soratami Rainshaper has an ability pay 3, bounce a land you control, and give target creature Shroud. Effectively, I think that's the errata at least. Soratami Savant is pay 3, bounce a land, and you can counter target spell unless they pay 3 mana.
Oh my god. That's pretty good.
Yeah, Maloku of the Clouded Mirror is probably one of the most well-known Moonfolk, but it's got an ability of pay 1, bounce a land, create a 1/1 blue illusion with flying. And then the final one, which is not technically a Moonfolk, actually, the Patron of the Moon, Spirit, not a Moonfolk, that has an ability. It's the only creature in Magic's history that's ever had this ability of Moonfolk Offering, which means that you can sacrifice a Moonfolk you control, and he costs that much less to cast, equal to the Moonfolk you sacrificed, CMC. And then he has an ability that lets me dump my lands onto the board. So for 1, it says you can put 2 lands from your hand into play tapped.
Damn.
So he kind of pays off
Wow.
When you've got a really big hand and you want to get all those lands down.
Also a surprise blocker if you do the offering, like flash it
absolutely,
in.
Absolutely.
Huh.
Yeah. It could definitely be relevant in that moment as well. If I'm being honest, the Moonfolk are more here for flavor than anything. They don't often achieve a whole lot, but I just like them, and I don't mind if the deck's not at the highest possible power level. So I just kind of embrace the vibe. Synergies and combos. So I mentioned pretty early on that this deck has some backup win conditions. And let's just get into those. So there's alternate win conditions, some backup plans. Despite being pretty straightforward Voltron protection. The other wincons include a very thematic Field of the Dead. Again, it's a Walking Dead deck, and it seems like the Walking Dead have found Glenn in the Moonfolk dimension that he's ended up in.
You can't get rid of them.
We're going to see... like a bad penny, these zombies. You just can't get rid of them. So the real combo with Field of the Dead, though, is that I've got a pie-in-the-sky dream combo that I'd like to pull off at some point, and that I hope to achieve. Maybe it's a secret achievement that I'm trying to unlock with this deck. There's even a combo in this deck where I can create infinite zombies at instant speed. And it requires me to have, in addition to an activated Field of the Dead with 7 different lands of different names, I need to have Retreat to Coral Helm, which is an aura that says whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you can either scry 1 or tap or untap target creature. So Retreat to Coral Helm plus a Walking Atlas plus Ghost Town. And Ghost Town specifically has an ability where you can pay 0 to bounce it to your hand from the battlefield. And you can only do that during another player's turn for that 0 ability. And it taps for colorless mana. But that means that on an opponent's turn, I could bounce the Ghost Town to my hand, tap my Walking Atlas, put the Ghost Town into play, Retreat to Coral Helm, untaps my Walking Atlas, and then I pay 0 to return Ghost Town to my hand again. And I just do that infinitely, and we just blast out instant speed, infinite zombie tokens. And then we just overwhelm the board, and we do that right before my turn, so then I can just dump a zombie apocalypse onto the board and knock out all 3 opponents with that. So that's kind of like a dream win condition that I haven't actually pulled off.
That'd be hilarious if you did,
happen. Though. Exactly. And the
surprise
idea
zombies
of like surprise zombie apocalypse in an Azorious deck.
You don't see that coming every day.
Nobody's expecting that, and that's what I like about it. I like having these little miniature challenges for myself while I'm playing to see if I can pull them off. Another piece that is another effective instant win here. We're running Approach of the Second Sun, which of course is a very typical win condition that you see in an Azorious deck, because Glenn deserves to see the sunrise, doggone it, and we're going to make that happen. So we're not just running Approach of the Second Sun, because that would be a little too easy, I think, especially considering Glenn could even draw the 7 cards. That could happen. That's still a way to work it. But if we want to try and knock it out a little bit more quickly, we can skip the waiting around and respond to our own Approach of the Second Sun with 4 different spells. Narset's Reversal, which is going to copy it and return it to Ither's hand. That's great. Lapse of Certainty, which counters it and puts it on top of our library. Memory Lapse, which counters it and puts it on top of our library. And Reprieve, which bounces a spell off the stack to its owner's hand. So all of those get me a lot closer to that second casting of Approach of the Second Sun. So we take making sure Glenn survives seriously around these parts. A couple of the pieces that are also kind of relevant and can kind of clinch the game as well. We've got a Psychosis Crawler in here, because if you're drawing 10 or more cards in a given turn, that adds up very quickly, especially if your opponents have been attacking each other, and then all of a sudden 10, 15 damage that they weren't expecting can be very, very relevant. And the last piece that's also sort of a win condition, it's not a very serious win condition, but I like it, and it's kind of fun in here. I threw in Triskaidekaphile, which is the word for someone who's scared of the number 13, I think. But its ability says, I should just read it so that I don't get it wrong. Triskaidekaphile says you have no max hand size. It's a 1/3 human wizard for 2. It's also got an ability. Well, it says at the beginning of your upkeep, if you have exactly 13 cards in your hand, you win the game. And then for 3 and a blue, you can draw a card. So the draw card is pretty expensive. The not really super relevant. The thing I kind of like about it, though, is that it's more for the psychological benefit of making people think that it's the threat and not,
right, let them burn removal on 15.
It. Exactly. Like it's that misdirection kind of stuff. But yeah, more than anything, I kind of a kick out of casting it and not really having any intention to do anything with it, but still seeing people burn removal on it. Just get concerned that this thing is gonna. The real Triskaidekaphobia is in my opponents and not in him. Yeah, that's the bulk of Glenn Moonwalker. He's gonna try and moonwalk past some dinosaurs at some point here, and
ow!
As far as weaknesses and challenges, I mean, his biggest challenge I think is if he just doesn't really get the ball rolling, if he gets knocked out early, or if all of his auras and equipment were to get exiled or seriously removed, then it can be tough for me to really get going. You need to be drawing cards and frequently and often.
Or you have to deal with another blue deck.
Or you have to deal with another blue deck. Yeah, exactly.
That's always
when my counter spells are doing extra duty. Yeah, so that those can happen as well. But for the most part, I like it, and I think he's gonna be he's gonna try and do something with dinosaurs. They're a much larger, louder, and hungrier threat.
At least the Skulk will help you get under them fairly often. So
that is gonna do a lot of work. Skulk does a lot of work until you get better equipment and stuff on Glenn. It's great for those first several turns, when you just want to guarantee you're getting into that extra card draw, getting into that damage. But yeah, that's Glenn.
All right. If you like this, like and subscribe, and tune in for other videos, and check out my video as well if you want to see the dinosaur deck.
And if you're curious about what I talked about in this video today, and you want to check out the deck list is going to be down in the description. We're going to include the snapshot list that includes exactly what I talked about today, the deck list, and then we'll also include another list that's going to show if I've made any changes, the live list as well. I'm going to start doing that so that people can track and see if they're curious. Maybe the decks have changed since the video came out, and many of our decks do change from when we initially talk about them on the channel.
Yeah, sometimes right after we record.
Frequently, yeah, that's kind of how it goes. Sometimes you're holding off those changes because you want to be able to talk about how the deck functions as it is, but there'll be chances for growth later. But yeah, check out those links below, and thanks for watching.